Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the long hallway of Riverside Athletic Academy, the wheels squeaking against the polished floors. At 52 years old, she had been working as the head janitor at this prestigious sports school for 3 years. Every morning at 5, she arrived before anyone else, cleaning classrooms, emptying trash bins, and mopping floors until they sparkled. The academy was home to 400 of the most talented young athletes in the country. These students came from wealthy families who paid enormous fees to train their children for Olympic dreams. They ran on state-of-the-art tracks, swam in Olympic-sized pools, and trained with coaches who had worked with world champions. Maria wore simple blue coveralls and comfortable sneakers that had seen better days. Her graying hair was always pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the way some students treated her. She spoke with a slight accent, having moved to America from Guatemala 20 years ago with nothing but hope and determination. Most students barely noticed her existence. To them, she was just part of the background, like the lockers or the trophy cases that lined the walls. They would drop their energy bar wrappers on the floor she had just cleaned, leave muddy footprints on her freshly mopped surfaces, and never bother to say thank you when she held doors open for them. But Maria noticed everything. As she cleaned the track early each morning, she watched the runners train. She observed their breathing patterns, their stride lengths, and the way they paced themselves around the oval. While wiping down the gym equipment, she studied how the athletes stretched and prepared their bodies for competition. The students had no idea that Maria had once been someone completely different. They saw only a middle-aged janitor who emptied their trash and cleaned their messes. They could never imagine that this quiet woman pushing a mop had secrets that would soon change everything they thought they knew about talent, determination, and what it truly meant to be fast. During her lunch breaks, Maria would sometimes sit on the bleachers and watch practice sessions. The coaches shouted instructions about proper form and technique, but Maria had learned these lessons through different means. Her education had come from a world these privileged students could never understand, where running wasn't just a sport but a matter of survival. The academy's walls were covered with photographs of successful graduates who had gone on to compete in the Olympics, win college scholarships, and break records. Their young faces smiled confidently from the frames, representing years of professional training and expensive coaching. None of these photos showed someone who looked like Maria, and certainly none showed someone who had learned to run not on a perfect track, but on mountain paths and through dangerous terrain. As the weeks passed, Maria continued her routine of arriving early, working quietly, and observing the athletes who filled the hallways during the day. She knew that soon, everything would change. The annual athletic challenge was approaching, and with it would come an opportunity that would shock everyone at Riverside Athletic Academy. The students who laughed when they saw her struggle with heavy equipment had no idea what was coming. Maria's story was about to unfold in ways that would challenge every assumption these young athletes had about speed, training, and what it meant to be truly fast. The quiet janitor they ignored was preparing to teach them lessons they would never forget. The mockery started on a Tuesday morning when Maria was cleaning the main athletic hall. Tyler Morrison, the Academy's star sprinter and son of a famous Olympic coach, was showing off to his friends near the trophy display. His personal best times were posted on the wall, and college scouts had already started calling about full scholarships. "Look at her trying to move that heavy equipment," Tyler laughed, pointing at Maria as she struggled to push a large floor buffer across the gym. "I bet she couldn't run to the end of this hallway without collapsing." His friends joined in the laughter, their voices echoing off the high ceilings. Sarah Chen, the captain of the girls' track team, shook her head with amusement. "My grandmother could probably outrun her," she said, adjusting her designer athletic wear. Sarah held 3 state records and had been featured on the cover of Young Athlete magazine. She had never worked a day in her life outside of training. The group of athletes gathered around, finding entertainment in making jokes about Maria's age and appearance. They imitated her careful, methodical way of walking and exaggerated her slight limp from years of hard physical labor. Some pulled out their phones to record videos, thinking it would be funny to share on social media. Marcus Williams, a scholarship student from a tough neighborhood, felt uncomfortable but didn't speak up. He was one of the few students who actually acknowledged Maria with a polite nod each morning. Marcus had worked hard to earn his place at the academy and didn't want to risk his reputation by defending the janitor. "I wonder if she's ever seen a real race," laughed Jessica Palmer, whose father owned a chain of sporting goods stores. "She probably thinks jogging to the bus stop is athletic training." The cruel comments continued as Maria continued her work, pretending not to hear but feeling every word like a sharp needle. Coach Anderson walked by during the worst of the teasing. He was a respected former Olympic athlete who should have stopped the behavior, but he simply shook his head and kept walking. To him, Maria was just part of the support staff, not worthy of the same respect given to athletes. The harassment wasn't limited to that day. Over the following weeks, the students made it a game to make comments whenever Maria was nearby. They would dramatically move out of her way in the hallways, pretending she was moving too slowly. Some would deliberately drop extra trash near areas she had just cleaned, then laugh about giving her more exercise. During this time, Maria maintained her dignity and continued working without complaint. She had faced much worse than spoiled teenagers, and their words could not break her spirit. But something was building inside her, a quiet determination that these young people could not recognize. The annual Spring Athletic Challenge was announced during this period of harassment. It was a tradition at the academy, where students competed in various events for prizes and recognition. This year, for the first time, the administration had decided to make it open to all school community members, including staff, as a way to promote school unity. When the announcement was made over the intercom, the students burst into laughter. "I hope the janitor lady enters," Tyler announced loudly. "It would be hilarious to watch her try to keep up with real athletes." The idea spread through the school like wildfire, with students joking about how embarrassing it would be for any staff member to compete against trained athletes. Maria heard every word, every joke, every cruel comment. But instead of discouraging her, their mockery was lighting a fire that had been dormant for years. These privileged young people had no idea what they were awakening. The quiet janitor they dismissed so easily was about to remind them that true speed came from places they had never been and experiences they could never imagine. 25 years earlier, Maria Santos had been Maria Vasquez living in a small mountain village in Guatemala. Life there was nothing like the comfortable world of Riverside Athletic Academy. Every day was a struggle for survival, and running was not a sport, but a necessity. Maria's village was located in a remote area where the nearest town was 15 miles away through dangerous mountain terrain. When medical emergencies happened, when supplies ran low, or when threats appeared, someone had to run for help. That someone was often Maria, because even as a teenager, she was the fastest person in her community. She had learned to run on narrow mountain paths that would terrify most people. These trails wound around steep cliffs, through dense forests and over rocky terrain that could twist an ankle or worse with one wrong step. Maria ran these paths in darkness, guided only by moonlight and her incredible sense of balance and rhythm. During her teenage years, civil conflict reached her village. Armed groups would sometimes threaten the community, demanding food and supplies the villagers could barely spare. When danger approached, Maria was often chosen to run to neighboring villages to warn them, or to reach the authorities in the distant town. These were not casual jogs, but desperate sprints for survival. Maria would run for hours through the mountains, her heart pounding not just from exertion but from fear. She carried messages that could save lives, and failure was not an option. The rough mountain terrain had developed her legs into powerful machines, and the constant danger had sharpened her mind and reflexes. On one terrifying night when Maria was 17, armed men had surrounded her village just after sunset. The village elder whispered urgent instructions to Maria. She needed to reach the military post 20 miles away through the mountains before dawn. If she failed, her entire community might be killed or forced to flee with nothing. Maria ran that night like never before. She navigated treacherous paths in complete darkness, her feet finding secure footing by instinct and experience. Wild animals moved through the forest around her, but she was more afraid of the men threatening her village than of any jungle creature. She ran through pain, through exhaustion, and through terror. When she reached the military post just as the sun was rising, her clothes were torn from branches, her legs were bleeding from scratches, and her lungs burned from the thin mountain air. But she had made it. The soldiers mobilized immediately. and her village was saved. That run had taken her across terrain that would challenge the best trail runners in the world, at a pace that would have impressed Olympic coaches, and under pressure that no athlete in a stadium could ever understand. Maria had covered 20 miles of mountain terrain in under 4 hours, much of it in complete darkness. After that night, Maria became legendary in her region. When anyone needed a message carried quickly across dangerous terrain, they called for Maria Vasquez. She developed an uncanny ability to run in any conditions on any surface, and at speeds that seemed impossible for someone who had never had formal training. But the political situation in Guatemala continued to worsen, and eventually Maria made the heartbreaking decision to leave her homeland. She traveled north with nothing but the clothes on her back and feet that had carried her through thousands of miles of mountain terrain. In America, she took whatever work she could find. She cleaned houses, worked in restaurants, and eventually found steady employment as a janitor. Her running days seemed to be behind her, replaced by the quiet routine of mopping floors and emptying trash bins. The powerful legs that had once carried urgent messages through mountain passes now carried her slowly through school hallways. For years, Maria kept her past locked away. The comfortable Americans she worked for could never understand the world she came from, or the incredible physical feats she had accomplished. She became invisible, just another immigrant doing jobs that others didn't want to do. But now, listening to these privileged young athletes mock her, Maria felt something stirring inside her that had been sleeping for decades. These students, with their expensive equipment and professional coaches, had no idea what real running looked like. They were about to find out. The registration deadline for the athletic challenge was approaching, and the harassment from students had reached its peak. They had created social media, posts about the slow janitor lady, and were taking bets on whether any staff members would be brave enough to embarrass themselves by competing against real athletes. On Friday afternoon, Maria walked into the main office where Mrs. Henderson, the athletic director's secretary, was processing registration forms. The office was busy with students signing up for various events, and their chatter filled the room with excitement about the upcoming competition. "I would like to register for the athletic challenge," Maria said quietly, her accented English clear and determined. The room fell silent. Mrs. Henderson looked up from her paperwork with surprise, while the students nearby stopped their conversations to stare. Tyler Morrison, who was registering for multiple sprinting events, burst into laughter. "Are you serious?" he asked, not even trying to hide his amusement. "This is a real athletic competition, not a charity fun run." His friends joined in the laughter, pulling out their phones to record what they thought would be a hilarious moment. Maria remained calm and steady. "Yes, I am serious. I would like to enter the distance running event." She pulled out $20 from her worn wallet to pay the registration fee, money that represented a significant portion of her weekly grocery budget. Mrs. Henderson looked uncomfortable with the situation but couldn't find any rules that prevented staff members from participating. "Well, I suppose if you're sure about this," she said hesitantly, clearly worried about potential embarrassment for the school. Sarah Chen shook her head in disbelief. "You realize this is a 5-mile race, right? And there will be college scouts watching." She was genuinely concerned that having a janitor participate would somehow diminish the prestige of the event. "I understand," Maria replied simply, signing her name on the registration form with careful handwriting. The news spread through the school like wildfire. Students gathered in groups, messaging each other about the incredible development. Some felt embarrassed for Maria, while others saw it as the setup for the funniest thing that had ever happened at the academy. Coach Anderson heard about Maria's registration and called her into his office. He was a kind man who didn't want to see anyone get hurt or humiliated. "Maria, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is a very competitive event. These students have been training their entire lives. I'm worried you might injure yourself trying to keep up." Maria listened respectfully but remained firm in her decision. "Coach Anderson, I have been running my entire life too, just not on your track." There was something in her voice that made him pause, a quiet confidence that didn't match his image of her as just a janitor. "These kids are fast, Maria, really fast. The winning time last year was under 30 minutes for 5 miles. That's a 6-minute mile pace." He was trying to help her understand what she was getting into. "I understand the distance and the pace, Maria replied calmly. "I have run much farther and much faster when it mattered." Something in her tone made Coach Anderson study her more carefully. For the first time, he really looked at Maria not as a janitor, but as a person. He noticed her posture, the way she held herself, and the quiet strength in her eyes. But he still couldn't imagine this middle-aged cleaning lady competing seriously with his trained athletes. The weekend before the race, Maria made a special trip to a sporting goods store. She had saved money for months, and now she had a specific purchase to make. She bought a pair of professional running shoes, the first pair she had owned in decades. They were simple and functional, nothing like the expensive gear the students wore, but they fit perfectly. That evening, Maria drove to a secluded park outside town. As the sun set, she began to run. For the first time in years, she let her body remember what it had once been capable of. She started slowly, feeling the decades of careful, controlled movement giving way to something more natural and powerful. Her stride lengthened, and her breathing deepened as muscle memory awakened. The careful, methodical steps of a janitor transformed into the fluid, efficient gait of someone who had once run through mountains in the darkness. With each step, more of her true self emerged from the quiet shell she had built around herself. As she ran through the park in the growing darkness, Maria felt 25 years disappear. Her legs remembered the rhythm of urgent mountain runs, and her lungs remembered how to process the thin air of high altitudes. The overweight, slow-moving woman the students mocked was dissolving, replaced by someone they could never have imagined. By the time she finished her run, Maria knew she was ready. The students at Riverside Athletic Academy were about to learn that sometimes the most extraordinary abilities hide in the most ordinary places. The day of the athletic challenge arrived with perfect weather. The entire school community gathered on the main athletic field, with bleachers packed with students, parents, faculty, and even some local media covering the prestigious academy's annual event. College scouts sat in a special section, clipboards ready to evaluate potential recruits. Maria arrived early, as always, but this time she wasn't carrying cleaning supplies. She wore simple black running shorts, a plain white t-shirt, and her new running shoes. Her hair was pulled back in the same neat ponytail she wore every day, but something about her posture and presence was different. The students noticed her immediately and erupted in whispers and laughter. Many pulled out their phones to record what they expected to be an embarrassing spectacle. Social media posts had already been prepared with captions about the hilarious janitor who thought she could compete with real athletes. "I can't believe she actually showed up," Jessica Palmer whispered to her friends. "This is going to be so awkward." The girls positioned themselves to get the best video angles of what they assumed would be Maria's quick exhaustion and defeat. The 5-mile race was the premier event of the day, featuring the Academy's best distance runners. Tyler Morrison was entered despite being primarily a sprinter, confident that his natural athletic ability would carry him to victory. Sarah Chen had been training specifically for this race for months, determined to set a new school record. As the runners gathered at the starting line, Maria took her position at the far right, away from the cluster of young athletes. The contrast was striking: sleek professional racing uniforms and high-tech equipment versus her simple, modest outfit that looked like it came from a discount store. Race director Coach Williams addressed the participants and spectators. "This is a certified 5-mile course that will test endurance, strategy, and mental toughness. Runners will complete 5 laps around our track." He looked directly at Maria with concern. "Remember, this is not mandatory for all participants. Anyone who feels they cannot complete the distance safely should not feel pressured to continue." The starting signal would be given in 1 minute. Maria closed her eyes and took deep breaths, but she wasn't nervous about the race. Instead, she was traveling back in time to a mountain village where running meant survival, where speed was measured not in medals but in lives saved. She thought about the night she had run 20 miles through dangerous terrain to save her village. She remembered the feeling of her feet finding perfect placement on rocky paths in complete darkness. She recalled the rhythm of her breathing as she climbed steep mountain slopes at a pace that would have impressed Olympic trainers. The whistle blew, and the race began. The young athletes shot forward in a burst of energy and enthusiasm, their expensive shoes pounding against the track in perfect synchronization. They had been taught to start strong and establish position early in the race. The crowd cheered, loudly for their favorites, with parents and friends shouting encouragement. Maria started much more conservatively, settling into a steady rhythm that seemed almost casual compared to the aggressive pace set by the students. The gap between her and the lead pack grew quickly, and the crowd's attention focused on the real competition happening at the front of the field. "She's already falling behind," Tyler called out to his teammates as they passed her on the first turn. "This is going to be over before the second lap." The lead group was moving at a pace that would have been impressive in a college race, driven by adrenaline and the desire to prove themselves in front of the scouts. After the first mile, Maria was nearly 200 yards behind the leaders. The crowd was barely paying attention to her anymore, focusing instead on the exciting battle between Tyler, Sarah, and the other top students. Some spectators were already making jokes about how long it would take her to finish. But something strange was happening that only the most experienced observers might have noticed. While the young athletes were running with visible effort, breathing hard and already showing signs of fatigue, Maria looked completely relaxed. Her breathing was deep and controlled, her stride was effortless, and her face showed no strain whatsoever. By the halfway point of the race, the lead group was beginning to feel the pressure of their aggressive early pace. Several runners had already dropped back, unable to maintain the speed they had started with. Tyler was breathing heavily, and even Sarah was starting to show signs of distress. Maria, meanwhile, had not changed her pace at all. She was still running the same steady rhythm she had established at the start, but now something remarkable was becoming apparent. While she had started far behind, the gap was no longer growing. In fact, to the amazement of anyone paying attention, it was starting to shrink. The quiet janitor who cleaned their floors every morning was about to teach these young athletes a lesson about what real running looked like. As the race entered its fourth mile, something extraordinary began to happen. The confident young athletes who had started so aggressively were now struggling to maintain their pace. Tyler Morrison, the star sprinter, was gasping for air and had fallen back to fifth place. Several other runners had dropped out entirely, defeated by the ambitious pace they had set in the early miles. Sarah Chen was still in the lead, but her form was deteriorating rapidly. Her breathing was labored, her stride had shortened, and sweat was pouring down her face despite the cool morning air. The months of training were being tested by the reality of maintaining a sub-6-minute mile pace over 5 miles. Meanwhile, Maria Santos was moving through the field like a force of nature. She had passed the struggling runners in the back half of the pack and was now gaining ground on the leaders with every step. Her breathing remained steady and controlled, her posture was perfect, and her pace had not wavered since the start of the race. The crowd began to notice what was happening. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as parents and students realized that the janitor they had dismissed was not only still running strongly, but was actually catching up to their best athletes. Phones that had been recording her expected failure were now capturing something completely unexpected. "Is that really her?" one parent asked another, squinting at the approaching figure. "The cleaning lady is actually racing?" Coach Anderson stood up from his seat, his experienced eye recognizing what he was seeing. This wasn't just someone who had gotten lucky or was having a good day. This was a runner, a real runner, with technique and endurance that spoke of serious training and natural talent. With 1 mile remaining, Maria moved into third place. She passed exhausted students who could barely believe what they were seeing. These were athletes who had been training since childhood, who had won state championships and broken school records, and a middle-aged janitor was running past them as if they were standing still. Tyler Morrison watched in shock as Maria glided past him with seemingly effortless grace. Her footsteps were quiet and efficient, while his were heavy and labored. "How is this possible?" he gasped to himself, too exhausted to even feel embarrassed. Sarah Chen heard footsteps approaching from behind and turned to see Maria gaining ground with every stride. The sight was so surreal that Sarah momentarily forgot about her own race strategy. The janitor who mopped the floors of her school was about to pass her in the most important race of her high school career. With half a mile to go, Maria moved into second place. The crowd was now completely silent, watching in amazement as this unexpected competitor continued her steady, relentless advance. College scouts were frantically asking coaches who this woman was and where she had come from. The final quarter mile of the race was run in an atmosphere of complete disbelief. Maria had taken the lead and was pulling away from Sarah Chen with every step. Her form was still perfect, her breathing still controlled, and her pace was actually increasing as the other runners faded. But then something happened that transformed an already extraordinary moment into something that would be talked about for years to come. As Maria approached the final turn, she reached up and pulled a bandana from her pocket. In one smooth motion, she tied it around her eyes, creating a blindfold that completely blocked her vision. The crowd gasped in collective shock. Students jumped to their feet, unable to believe what they were seeing. This woman who they had mocked and dismissed was not only winning their race, but was about to finish it blindfolded. Coach Anderson later said it was the most incredible display of running, confidence, and spatial awareness he had ever witnessed. Maria navigated the final turn and straightaway with perfect precision, staying in lane 1 while running at a pace that would have been impressive for sighted runners half her age. The sound of her footsteps on the track became the only noise in the stadium as 400 students and hundreds of spectators watched in complete silence. This was no longer just a race. It was a demonstration of what true athletic ability looked like when combined with mental toughness forged in real-world challenges. Maria crossed the finish line with a time that shattered the school record by nearly 2 minutes. She had completed 5 miles in under 28 minutes while running the final quarter mile blindfolded. As she removed the bandana and walked calmly through the finish area, the entire stadium remained silent, too stunned to react. The quiet janitor who had been invisible to them for 3 years had just delivered a performance that none of them would ever forget. The silence lasted for what felt like an eternity before someone in the stands began to clap. Then another person joined in, and another, until the entire stadium erupted in thunderous applause. 400 students who had spent weeks mocking Maria Santos were now on their feet, giving her the longest standing ovation in the history of Riverside Athletic Academy. Tyler Morrison was the first student to approach her after the race. His face was red with exhaustion and embarrassment, but he walked directly to Maria with his hand extended. "I owe you a huge apology," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I was completely wrong about everything. That was the most incredible running I've ever seen." Sarah Chen, still catching her breath from her second-place finish, joined them with tears in her eyes. "I've been training my whole life, and I've never seen anything like that." "How did you learn to run like that?" "And the blindfold at the end?" She shook her head in amazement. Maria smiled gently at the young athletes surrounding her. "I learned to run in Guatemala in the mountains where my village was located. There, running was not a sport but a way to help people and sometimes to save lives. I had to run at night through dangerous terrain, often without any light to guide me. That's where I learned to trust my feet and my sense of balance." Coach Anderson pushed through the crowd of students and college scouts who were now clamoring to speak with Maria. His expression was a mixture of embarrassment and profound respect. "Maria, I need to apologize for not recognizing your abilities earlier." "What you just did? That was Olympic-level performance. Where did you train? Who coached you?" "Life coached me," Maria replied simply. "The mountains taught me to run efficiently. Danger taught me to run fast, and necessity taught me to run far." She paused and looked around at the faces of students who were seeing her as a real person for the first time. "But mostly I learned that real strength comes from inside, not from expensive equipment or perfect facilities." The college scouts approached with business cards and questions, but Maria politely declined their offers. "My running days for competition are behind me," she explained. "I run now for different reasons." She gestured toward the students gathered around her. "Perhaps to teach lessons that cannot be learned from textbooks or coaches." In the days that followed, everything changed at Riverside Athletic Academy. Students who had never acknowledged Maria's existence now greeted her warmly in the hallways. They asked about her life in Guatemala and listened with genuine interest to her stories about running through mountain terrain that would challenge the world's best athletes. Tyler Morrison started a school fundraiser to help Maria bring her family members still living in Guatemala to visit America. Sarah Chen organized a petition to have Maria's race time officially recognized by the State Athletic Association. The entire student body seemed to undergo a transformation in how they viewed not just Maria, but all the support staff who made their privileged education possible. Maria continued her work as head janitor, But now she also became an unofficial mentor to struggling athletes. Students who were having trouble with endurance would seek her advice, and she would share wisdom about pacing, breathing, and mental toughness that no coach could teach them. The story of the janitor who outran every athlete at the prestigious academy spread far beyond the school. News outlets picked up the story, and Maria became a symbol of hidden talent and the importance of not judging people by their appearance or circumstances. But perhaps the most important change was in Maria herself. For years she had kept her past and her abilities hidden, believing that they had no place in her new life. The race had reminded her that extraordinary experiences and skills don't disappear just because circumstances change. She began to carry herself with renewed pride, no longer invisible but recognized for the remarkable person she had always been. The expensive trophies in the school's display cases now shared space, with a simple photograph of Maria crossing the finish line blindfolded. It served as a permanent reminder to every student that true athletic greatness comes not from privilege or perfect training conditions, but from determination, experience, and the kind of inner strength that can only be forged through real challenges. Maria Santos had taught 400 young athletes the most important lesson of their sporting careers: that the most extraordinary abilities often hide in the most ordinary places, and that respect must be earned not through assumptions but through recognition of each person's unique journey and hidden strengths.